The air in the auxiliary hangar office was thick with the kind of oppressive humidity that coats the throat and makes the cheap polyester of a civilian shirt cling to the skin like plastic wrap. It smelled of low-tide brine, old coffee grounds, and the metallic tang of unearned authority. The location itself was a forgotten corner of the Freeport district, a cinder block monument to black market bureaucracy and the kind of violence that never makes the evening news. General Marius Volkov sat behind a desk built for 3 men, massive and scarred, stained by decades of spilled bourbon and signed death warrants. He was a man accustomed to the gravity of his own orbit. His uniform, a bespoke disaster of crisp khaki and polished brass, reflected the single fluorescent tube struggling overhead, casting his face in stark, judgmental shadows. He didn't look up immediately. He was studying a half-eaten packet of stale crackers, moving them around the oak surface as if conducting a slow-motion military campaign against gluten, and standing opposite him, precisely centered on the chipped linoleum where the cleaning crew had clearly given up years ago, was Santos. Santos looked exactly like what he pretended to be, a man defeated by utility bills and early mornings. He wore faded denim and a cheap light blue polo shirt, the kind that screams weekend shopper and harmless inconvenience. His hands were rough, but not from fighting. They were calloused from handling wrenches and supervising loading docks. The dark circles under his eyes weren't tactical fatigue. They were the consequence of reading bedtime stories at 9 and clocking in at 5. He was, by Volkov's assessment, an anomaly, a mild disturbance in the general's otherwise perfectly controlled ecosystem of corruption. There were 4 other men in the room. 2 stood flanking the heavy steel door, their posture loose, bored, their rifles slung but ready. 2 more, closer to the desk, were Volkov's personal guard, men with the cold, dead eyes of career killers, trained to react to a threat before Volkov even registered its existence. But they weren't watching Santos. They were watching the general, waiting for the performance to conclude. Because Santos, the father, was not a threat. He was theater. "You have wasted 6 minutes of my afternoon, Mr. Santos," Volkov said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that suggested deep contentment. He finally lifted his gaze, and the contempt was immediate, absolute. It wasn't hatred. It was the impersonal disdain one reserves for a sticky patch of floor or a faulty engine part. "You came here against every piece of good advice you were undoubtedly given, to discuss an incident involving a 7-year-old child and a security detail. A triviality." Santos didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even clench his jaw, a sign of discipline that Volkov in his arrogance dismissed as simple fear. "General," Santos began, his voice surprisingly soft, pitched just high enough to be deferential. "My son Leo. He was waiting for me outside the restricted zone. He was standing exactly where I told him to stand. Your corporal, the one with the scar over his eyebrow, he approached Leo, demanded the identification packet, and when Leo panicked, the corporal, he pushed him, hard. Leo fell back, hit his head on the curb. He needed staples." Volkov leaned back slowly, the leather chair groaning in protest. He reached into his inner breast pocket, produced a slim, expensive silver case, and extracted a cigar, taking his time to trim the cap with a precision blade that looked far too elegant for this room. He didn't offer one. "I am running a supply line for half the continent, Mr. Santos. I manage 3,000 soldiers, a fleet of 80 ships, and a budget that exceeds the GDP of minor nations. And you are here discussing a scraped knee." Volkov lit the cigar, the sulfur flare momentarily blinding in the gloom. He inhaled deeply, the smoke a blue cloud of dismissal. The corporal acted appropriately. "Your son was loitering near a high-value asset transfer point. He was a potential hazard. The corporal applied necessary, proportional force to remove the hazard." "Necessary force?" Santos repeated, and for the first time, a tremor entered his voice. A high, desperate edge that pleased Volkov immensely. "Good. Breakdown imminent." "Necessary," Volkov confirmed, blowing a perfect ring of smoke directly toward Santos's head. "Look at you, Mr. Santos. You are a mechanic, a delivery man, a man defined by the limitations of his paycheck. You seek compensation? $100 for the emergency room visit? Fine. We are feeling generous today. Take the money, sign the waiver, and ensure your offspring learns the fundamental truth of this world. Authority is absolute, and children, like men, must learn their proper place." Santos's eyes, which had been tracking the smoke ring, now settled back on the general. They were brown, unremarkable, slightly bloodshot from lack of sleep, but something shifted in the light, a sudden flattening of expression. The desperate father persona, which had been meticulously maintained for 48 hours, since the moment he saw the staples in Leo's hairline, began to peel away like old paint. "It wasn't just the push, General," Santos said, the volume dropping again, now barely above a conspiratorial whisper. It forced Volkov to strain slightly to hear him. This was a tactical error by the general. He had leaned in, reducing the distance between himself and the supposed victim. When Leo cried, "And he is 7, General," he was scared and in pain. The corporal laughed. He told Leo that if he ever saw him near that dock again, he wouldn't just push him. He would ensure he disappeared entirely. He said he would teach the little runt what real pain looked like. Volkov frowned. That was perhaps a bit much, even for his men. He waved a dismissive hand, scattering the ash into a small, tarnished brass tray. "My men are rough, Mr. Santos. They deal in realities you cannot comprehend. They scare the weak, so they don't have to kill the foolish. It is a necessary cruelty." "Cruelty, General?" Santos tilted his head, a minuscule movement that Volkov interpreted as deep distress. "Yes, cruelty," Volkov insisted, savoring the word. "And I will not tolerate this pathetic intrusion any longer. The compensation is on the desk." He slapped a thick envelope down, sealed with a government stamp that meant nothing. "Take it. Walk out that door. Forget the name of the corporal. Forget the incident. Go back to your wrenches and your loading manifests and teach your son to respect the structure. Or next time, I won't bother with staples. Understood?" Santos looked at the envelope. He looked at the general. He looked at the 4 guards, noting the slight shift in their weight. The subtle way Guard 3 was chewing gum, creating a predictable rhythm that could be used as a metronome. And then, the mask shattered. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow, terrifying transition, like watching a deep-sea predator rise from the abyssal zone. The tiredness in Santos's face vanished, replaced by an alertness so profound it felt like a pressure change in the room. The softness around his eyes contracted, pulling the skin taut, revealing the geometry of a man built for zero-sum calculations. His right hand, the one that had been loosely hanging by his side, moved perhaps an inch. It didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, it brushed the fabric of his cheap polo shirt, just beneath the left collarbone. The movement was imperceptible to the guards, who were keyed only to fast, broad threats. A shout, a lunge, a drawn firearm. But Volkov, who had dealt with thousands of men trying to suppress panic, saw only the subtle tightening of muscle. "General Volkov," Santos said, and the voice was different. It had depth. It had resonance. It was the voice of command, refined and lethal, stripped of all local dialect and civilian tremor. It was the voice of a recording that announces, "Evacuation protocol is now in effect." "I didn't come here for compensation." Volkov laughed, a dry, hacking sound of profound disbelief. "Then what, little man? You think you frighten me? You think your pitiful complaints will halt this machine?" Santos took a single, deliberate step toward the desk. It was a step Volkov instinctively hated. Too close, too confident. "I came here because your corporal decided that my son, my only child, was a permissible collateral casualty in your petty little empire." Santos leaned slightly forward, his eyes locking onto Volkov's. "And I have spent the last 36 hours analyzing the situation. Not the injury, General. The cost analysis." Volkov's smile curdled. He was starting to feel the chill, not the fear of violence, but the unease of profound miscategorization. "You have no idea who I am," Volkov scoffed, waving a hand dismissively at the guard nearest to Santos. "Remove him. If he resists, break something non-essential." Guard 1, a thick-set man named Renzo, stepped forward with bored impatience, reaching for Santos's shoulder. Renzo's mistake was confidence. He assumed the struggle would be standard, a flailing, panicked civilian. The shift was instantaneous. The slow burn ended in a single, devastating fraction of a second. When Renzo's hand made contact, Santos didn't block or recoil. He accepted the contact. His left elbow shot out. Not a full swing, but a controlled, rotational strike aimed precisely at the brachial plexus in Renzo's inner arm. The velocity was too high for bone. It was a percussive strike designed to overload the nervous system. Renzo made a strangled, sucking sound, a gasp that died before it became a scream. He didn't fall. He locked up entirely, his rifle clattering softly against the polished stone floor, his eyes wide and unseeing, his central nervous system experiencing an involuntary, massive reboot. Guard 2, reacting on pure instinct, started to bring his rifle up. Santos was already in motion. His weight distribution, which had looked so slack and tired just moments ago, was now perfectly centered, fluid, and low. He didn't turn to face Guard 2. Instead, he dropped his entire body weight, rotating his hips and delivering a low, sweeping kick. Not at the ankles, which is obvious, but at the knee. It was a specialized strike known as a shattering pivot. The sound was not a crack. It was a sickening wet crunch, like a tree branch breaking under a heavy weight. Guard 2's knee buckled inward, and he pitched face first, his helmet hitting the floor with a metallic clang. He was out of the fight entirely, incapacitated by pain and structural failure. The entire sequence took less than 1.5 seconds. Volkov, accustomed to the rhythmic brutality of war, saw the speed, but his mind still lagged. He saw the mechanic move like a ghost. The two remaining guards at the door finally registered the lethal reality and started sprinting forward. Santos ignored them. He was focused solely on Volkov, who was scrambling to pull the heavy sidearm, a customized .45 caliber from his desk drawer. Santos closed the remaining distance to the desk in a blur. He didn't vault the desk. He used the drawer handle Volkov had just grabbed as a fulcrum. As Volkov cleared the heavy weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger, Santos's right hand whipped out. It was not a disarmament move taught in police academies. It was a seizure. Santos gripped Volkov's wrist, not forcefully, but with strategic precision, and executed a small inward rotation combined with downward pressure on the median nerve. The general, a man who had withstood interrogation and battlefield trauma, suddenly dropped the pistol as if it were white-hot. A shock of debilitating pain ran up his arm, momentarily paralyzing the muscles in his shoulder and neck. "Don't touch my son again," Santos whispered, his face inches from the general's. There was no anger, no theatrical rage, just cold, perfect execution. The two guards from the door arrived, weapons raised, shouting commands in a language Volkov barely recognized, their reflexes delayed by the absolute unexpectedness of the violence. "Freeze!" Guard 4 bellowed, his rifle aimed at Santos's back. Santos, still maintaining the nerve-pinch grip on Volkov's wrist, twisted his body sharply to the side. He didn't need to see the guards. He knew their exact positions, their lines of fire, and their trajectory. The movement put Volkov's massive body directly between Santos and the barrels of the two approaching rifles. Volkov was now a human shield, paralyzed by pain and fear, eyes darting wildly between the cold face inches away and the muzzles of his own men's rifles. "General!" Guard 3 shouted, momentarily unsure if he should fire through his superior. The hesitation was the opening. "You're out of time," Santos murmured to Volkov. He shifted his grip on Volkov's wrist, driving the bone directly into the general's jugular notch, causing an immediate reflex of choked nausea. Volkov stumbled, gasping for air. Santos then let go of the wrist, but his hand moved instantly to the back of Volkov's neck, utilizing a specific pressure point below the occipital ridge. This wasn't designed to incapacitate, but to control. In one devastatingly smooth motion, Santos drove Volkov's head down toward the massive oak desk. Just before impact, he twisted the head slightly to the side, exposing the back of the neck fully. Then, Santos did the thing that shattered every remaining piece of Volkov's reality. He didn't strike the general. He dipped his head, just barely, and whispered something into Volkov's ear, a string of syllables in a language neither of the remaining guards understood. The words were not a threat. They were a code. Hydra Protocol, Sector Gamma 7, Operation Nightingale. Volkov froze entirely. His entire body, which had been fighting against the physical restraint, went utterly slack. His eyes, fixed wide, looked not at Santos the mechanic, but through him, seeing decades of highly compartmentalized intelligence. Those words, that protocol, had been sealed, known only to a council of 12 military commanders from 4 specific allied nations and 1 specific untraceable operative unit. The general, for the first time in his life, knew absolute paralyzing terror. The fear was not just of death, but of utter exposure and ruin at the highest level of international consequence. This man, the exhausted, harmless single father, was not a mechanic demanding $100. He was the consequence. The general had just threatened the son of a ghost. Santos tightened the grip on the general's neck, the movement forcing Volkov onto his knees on the cold concrete floor, a position utterly alien to a man who had commanded armies. The remaining two guards finally closed the distance, their rifles now pointed at the back of their general's head, their minds reeling from the confusion. "Put the weapons down," Santos ordered, his voice still low, calm, completely devoid of shouting. "Or I break his neck right now, and trust me, I won't make a mess." The guards looked at their general, kneeling like a penitent monk, sweating profusely, staring blankly ahead. They saw the sheer, unadulterated fear in Volkov's eyes, a fear so profound it superseded rank. Slowly, hesitantly, Guard 3 lowered his weapon. Guard 4 followed suit. Santos relaxed his posture, easing the pressure slightly, though his hand remained a steel vise on Volkov's neck. He looked at the two bewildered guards, then back down at the general. "General Volkov," Santos said, his voice now taking on the tone of a judge delivering a life sentence. He shifted his grip slightly, drawing attention to a minute, almost invisible scar just above his wrist bone, a specific, jagged triangle mark, small enough to be hidden by a watch or a cuff, known only to the highest echelons of deep black operations. It wasn't a tattoo, it was a brand, a cauterized signature of belonging to a unit that officially did not exist. "You asked who I was," Santos continued, his breath hot against the general's ear. "I am Sergeant Santos. I was deactivated 4 years ago. I requested the exit, the deep civilian cover, the anonymity, specifically so I could raise my son without this noise. I built a life of loading docks and school runs. I wore this ridiculous stained shirt, and I let the lack of sleep show on my face so men like you would look straight through me." He paused, letting the implication sink into the general's horrified mind. "You saw the mechanic, you saw the paycheck, you saw the weak father, you saw the pathetic victim, and you authorized violence against my child to prove a point about your absolute authority." Santos lifted his hand from the general's neck, a stunning concession, a testament to the utter psychological paralysis he had induced. Volkov remained kneeling, unable to move, unable to speak, focused solely on the terrifying clarity in the eyes of the man who looked like he drove a beat-up pickup truck. "The protocol I just cited, General, is the one authorized to retrieve high-value assets who have been compromised and to neutralize the threats responsible. And here is the cost analysis I mentioned earlier. For insulting me, I would have taken the $100 and left. For disrespecting my life, I might have reported your corporal to an internal affairs commission. But for placing a hand on my son, for making him bleed, and for laughing at his fear." Santos took a final, slow breath, looking down the corridor of concrete that led back to the outside world, to the hot sun, and to the car seat waiting for his son. "For that, General, I am reactivating my contract." He reached into the simple denim pocket and pulled out not a weapon, but a small, flexible metallic disc, a highly advanced biometric scrambler. He tossed it onto the desk. "This will intercept and decrypt every electronic communication your command structure has attempted in the last 72 hours. Everything about the weapons shipments, the smuggling routes, the payoff schedules, the political protection racket, it's all on there. It's all been routed, copied, and archived." Volkov's jaw worked silently. The evidence would not merely ruin him, it would topple governments. "You, General," Santos concluded, his voice utterly flat, "are now my primary operational asset. You will stand up, you will dismiss your guards, you will contact the corporal with the scar, and you will bring him here, alone. And you will ensure he is very apologetic to my son, or you will spend the rest of your life watching me dismantle your power structure, piece by painful piece from the inside out." He walked past the stunned, defeated guards, past the two men groaning softly on the floor and back toward the steel door. He didn't look back. The door scraped open, letting in the blinding sunlight and the loud, normal noise of the harbor. Santos adjusted the collar of his cheap stained polo shirt, becoming the tired dad once more. "Oh, and General," Santos said without turning around, his voice carrying clearly into the silent office, "when you stand up, wipe your knees. We don't want anyone to think you knelt for a civilian." He stepped out, the steel door hissing shut behind him, plunging the general back into the stale, fluorescent gloom. The general, Marius Volkov, commander of 3,000 men and master of a criminal empire, remained kneeling on the concrete floor, his expensive uniform stained, his command shattered, his spirit utterly broken by the quiet, invisible man he had mistaken for nothing. The sun outside felt warm and clean. Santos retrieved his battered pickup truck, He had a few calls to make. He had files to upload. And then he had to pick up Leo from school. He had promised his son ice cream. And Sergeant Santos always kept his promises. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.